Hello, everybody. My name is Jesse Nolan. I'm the membership manager of the Jazz Education Network, and we're delighted to have you here this evening for a special follow-up conversation called Jazz Education as a Force for Racial Understanding, Healing, and Justice. We have with us tonight a very, very special panel. We have our president of the Jazz Education Network, Sean Jones, our president-elect, Lonnie Davis. We also have with us Pharez Whitted, one of our board members, and very special guests, Jason Moran and Gary Bartz. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Sean Jones. Actually, before I do that, I want to make sure everybody out there knows that if you are a Gen member and you are attending this session today on Facebook Live and you would like a certificate of participation for this event, please send us an email. You can send that to office@jazzednet.org, and we will follow up with a certificate of participation. All right, so without further ado, Mr. Sean Jones.
Thank you so much, Jesse. We appreciate you. Welcome to everyone that's here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for bringing your hearts and your minds and your soul to this conversation, this much needed conversation, which is a continued conversation from the last one that we have had. And we had Lonnie Davis, who was with us the last time. We want to thank her for joining in the conversation again here. And we also have another board member, Pharez Whitted, who is here with us. Thank you so much for being here, Pharez. And we have two very special guests who are here with us. They obviously don't need any real introduction. You know who they are. They are some of the greatest musicians alive of any genre. We have Jason Moran, who's won multiple awards. He works with the Kennedy Center, has several albums out, does amazing projects. Virtual round of applause for Jason Moran. Yes, indeed. And we have the legendary Gary Bartz, who is here, who, what can I say, Miles Davis alum, has his own band, several recordings on multiple platforms, multiple record labels. Thank you so much, Mr. Bartz, for being here. Let's give him a round of applause. And what we like to do here, starting with Jason, is just have a quick moment for them to share some thoughts and general feelings about what we're dealing with. We'll have Jason first, and that will be followed up with Mr. Bartz, and then we'll dive into your questions.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've always thought the way I learned music in Houston, Texas, in Third Ward, the neighborhood George Floyd is from, that the music was embedded in every corner, in every home, in every front yard, every ditch. And that it could feel like that too, right? And that you should learn it from people who taught it like that. And so the way I learned music was around the issues of how it functioned in a neighborhood, not how it functioned on a stage, not how it functioned on a festival, you know, how it functioned in the neighborhood, how people danced to it, how people cursed to it, you know, all that. And so when I got to New York, which is like the world to me, I learned from people who continue to teach that way, like Jackie Bayard, Andrew Hill, and Muhal Richard Abrams. They kept the element of what it meant as a music that was a folk music, a music for folk and a music about folk. And that element, no matter how lofty it becomes, must continue to be there. And the struggles that we see on the street are the same struggles that exist on the stage. And for every musician over the past 120 years that has moved this music around the world, they have fought for stuff on the stage and they have fought off of the stage too. And it's important to teach and have students understand this relationship, that the music really is about both lives, the one on the stage and the one off. And you have to take care of everybody to do this effectively.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for that. That's so poignant. I can reflect on that as well. Growing up in the church, that's pretty much where I learned how to improvise in the Pentecostal church. So thank you so much for expressing that. Mr. Bartz, would you please share some of your thoughts with us on this matter?
Sure. I think this is a very interesting time period for musicians. because I hear a lot of my students, a lot of musicians reflecting, oh, I can't play with, I miss playing with people. I miss the going out and performing, I call it showing off. But um, I have to remind them, you don't learn on stage. You learn how to play in the house. Charlie Parker, for 3.5 years in his mom's house, 12 to 15 hours a day. That's how he became Charlie Parker. Now, we have that. They've given us that. That this is given to us. We have to stay in the house. So, it's a drag because of why, but you take advantage of what's given to you. Like you say, the saying, if you only have lemons, you make lemonade. So I think this is a very interesting time for musicians and for the world. Having gone through, I came of age in the '60s, and so and I grew up in a segregated city. I watched. I mean, I've seen racism at its ugliest. I came up with watched my parents watch how we had to deal with this. Also, the church, like you say, my first solo was in the church, so we come from the church. This music comes from the church. But I'm saying that basically what I'm trying to say is that we as musicians, not only to get yourself together, practice wise, but the technology, because I know so many of my musician friends my age have not embraced the technology yet, but this is making them have to embrace the technology. So I think it's a learning period. I'm trying to look at the bright side. I'm a Libra, so I try to look at the bright side. So that's how I feel about that.
Thank you so much. And coming from another fellow air sign, being a Gemini, I understand that. So thank you so much. I'd like to dive into our questions here right away, and I want to pose this question to Lonnie Davis first. And this is from a group of questions that were submitted. Everyone that's tuning in, thank you so much for submitting your questions. We have several dozen questions that were submitted. We'll get to as many of them as we can, but we want to remind you that this is an ongoing conversation, so we'll keep it happening. The first question is, how do I address current social justice issues with a diverse group of middle and high school students?
Thank you, Sean. I'm definitely happy to be here having this conversation again. How do you address social issues with middle and high school kids? I would say, for some reason, we're reluctant to want to have these types of conversations with students because I think we overcomplicate it. I think it can be very simple. We just be open with our kids. We address these issues head on and not make it, some mystery or some type of a taboo conversation. I think it's important to be open and honest and real with kids. I mean, they know when you're real with them and you're coming from the heart. But I would say just lay out all of the issues. Start with the history of the music, certainly. Use the music as a guide to have these conversations and make reference to the different masters, that experienced, some very tough times, and, tell the stories that need to be told to these students so that they can understand that this is not a new issue. These aren't new issues, but these are issues that not just us, but they, have been dealing with since the very beginning. And so I think the way to address it is to address it head on, and just let them know that this is a conversation that needs to be had. And perhaps you even bring the parents in, or certainly let the parents know that you're having these types of open conversations with their kids in classrooms. I would even go so far as to give the students assignments, around these issues. and have them to do their own research and then come back to the classroom with opinions about what they found. And so it doesn't have to stop with, just listening to the music or just dealing with, things in a bubble. I think, there's a way to tie all of it together and make it understandable and make it relative to the students.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Would anyone else like to expound on that from our panel?
I'd just like to say that and that is a good question, but I think that really starts at home. And the best that we can do is, as Lonnie said, is be honest. Because, I know what I see a lot of times coming into college. The students, they haven't been privy to a lot of honesty. And so it comes as a surprise sometimes, when they actually see the honesty and understand the honesty. So I think that's something to think about. But the parents, that's really the parents' job. That's not really our job.
Wow. Yes, indeed. Pharez, would you like to chime in on that?
I see when you're honest with the kids, I think that helps things to line up for them because they're living it too. They see it. Yeah. They're experiencing all of it. But that when people try to sugarcoat it or try to change the reality of it, that's confusing. That's what's confusing to them because they see everything that's going on. And kids, they keep it real. It's very simple for them. And when you're honest with them, it helps them to, well, that makes sense because what I'm seeing lines up with what you're saying. So I'm a big fan of keeping it real and letting them know what's going on. And you don't, it's not a thing about trying to scare anybody or make them freak out. And that goes both ways. But you just have to be upfront. And that's really the responsibility. I'm in line with, it starts with the parents. It always starts with the parents. But you know how we are as a people. We're kind of like the village people. So it's still everybody has to be on that page because you don't let anything slide by. We don't make excuses for anything. And once again, that goes both ways,
Fantastic. I'd like to pose a question to Mr. Moran here that was submitted. And the question is, as a white-skinned male educator, how can I best serve and support my young Black and brown students, as well as my colleagues of color, as we all move forward through this movement together?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it comes around awareness. Awareness of how jazz has been colonized, right? So you really start to look at what's Louis Armstrong's relationship to the stage and what's his manager's relationship to Louis Armstrong's relationship to the stage. And you start to break apart how the music has been, really framed, despite the music is built on aspects of freedom of musicians trying to let loose because they have that hour and a half on stage. So I think what you have to do is do a lot of self-reflection because that's what it's really going to take for those students to believe you. And also you should reach out, if you feel uncomfortable, reach out to your community of people that you trust and not feel like you should have all the answers. That's not your job as the teacher. But your job is to understand and have empathy for people who are struggling, people who may be struggling financially, people who are struggling emotionally, right? And any good teacher, despite the color of their skin, is supposed to have that intact to help take care of the well-being of a student who's decided to try to play this music in a way that gets rid of some of those notions, that frees up the future possibilities for future musicians. And you have to also maybe assess maybe what part you have played in keeping the music back. I mean, it sounds odd, right? But you have to take it into account. I have to think about it for myself, right? Every musician has to think about it. Every teacher has to think about it. You know, who do you give your solos to? All that kind of stuff. And it's a very tough moment because I think a lot of people were maybe wading around in a bit of a fog. And I have only worked with musicians who understood how to walk through that fog and still have a torch in the hand, you know, so that other musicians can find. And you will have to be much braver in addressing what race means in America if you have not been thus far. You will have to be exponentially more brave to talk about it, to feel a bit uncertain, because musicians have dealt with it for generations already on the stage. So have as much bravery that you acknowledge in those musicians in your classroom for yourself and for those students, because you're supposed to empower them. You're supposed to look for every opportunity that those students can get them every scholarship they need so that they continue to have faith in the music and faith in you as a teacher. I had a teacher that was like that, you know, in Houston, Dr. Robert Morgan. He was not black, but he taught myself, Chris, Dave, Robert Glasper, Walter Smith, Kendrick Scott, Eric Harlan, like all of us. He taught us the truth of what the music was in our neighborhood, in our schools. So, you know, you have to have faith, but you have to also do a lot of study if that has not been the case. And maybe, I might say, read a bunch of Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, if you have not.
Yes, indeed. One specifically, The Fire Next Time, is one of my favorites of Baldwin's. Thank you for that. Mr. Bartz, would you like to chime in on that?
Yeah. Once again, you know, it starts before it gets to the school. You know, if you haven't done your homework, see, I have a big problem, and I'm always, I can't not say this. There is only one race on earth. And every time I hear somebody say white, black, red, yellow, I don't know what it does to me. It makes me say, man, that's some stupid, you know, don't we know this? It's been proven. We know it. But we have bought into this color coding. And that's where the racism it's the foundation of racism. And as long as we keep saying white and black and red and yellow and all of that, we're going to have this problem. And you know, it's here, but by us saying it all the time, if we know better, why do we say it? You don't say, you know, 2 and 2. You don't say 2 and 2 is 5. You know, I mean, over and over again. If you keep saying it, then people will say, "Oh, well, I guess 2 and 2 is 5." You know, so I mean, we have bought into this lie, and that's basic. I know what your question was, but before you get a teacher, you know, they've got to be honest of what this is about and who they are. Javon Jackson told me something really funny. That Angela Davis came to his school, and a so-called white student asked her, when they were asking questions, they asked her, Miss Davis, what can I, as a white student, do to help the cause? And she said something, to me, this was hilarious. She said, stop being white. And that, I'm sure the young lady didn't understand what she meant by that, you know. But that's a simple solution. Stop buying into the fact that you think you're white or I think I'm black. We are human beings, and that's where it starts. So I mean, it's so ingrained. I don't even know what to do. So I just have to say it every time. I'm sorry. I'm going to say it every time. I will never refer to someone as a white person or someone as a black person. That we are human beings. There's only one race on earth. Now, you can argue with me about it. Science has proven that. DNA, 99 point something %. Come on. We can do better than that. So that, if I have a teacher, if I'm a kid and I have a teacher that's good, that's using those words, I've got a problem. So that's my spiel.
That is so true, and there is documented evidence of this. And if there's some reading that folks want to check out to address or to learn more about what Mr. Bartz is talking about, in recent times, there's a book that's called Sapiens that was written. His name is Yuval Harari, and he talks about a lot of what Mr. Bartz just dealt with. The actual first separation of classes in a caste system was by Hammurabi in Hammurabi's code, which was approximately between 8 to 10,000 years BC. And it's very interesting books, a very interesting book. And what I took away from the book was actually not necessarily as much about race, but the idea that the Homo sapien, or this version of humanity, is the only species that ever lived on Earth that has the ability to eradicate itself. The only one. We are the only living or ever living animate type of species to inhabit the Earth that can kill itself within 24 hours. So what you just said, it really hit home with me. Thank you so much for that. I want to get to the next question here, and I want to start with Lonnie on this one and just bring it around because it's a pretty intense question, and it starts off in an interesting way, and I'll just read it. It says, "We're all against racism, or we wouldn't be here. My question to the panel is how they respond to dogmatism, canceling, or other manifestations of extremism on the part of folk who would normally have been our allies. Is playing classical music cultural appropriation if you're Black? Is playing jazz cultural appropriation if you're white? It seems that the history of the music makes nonsense of these questions, but how do we convince people not to see things this way?" Very interesting question.
Oh, wow. You're going to give that one to me, huh?
It's for all of us.
I know, I'm just joking. Wow. Well, I would say the history would make nonsense of that question, but I'm glad that they asked. As we know, looking at the history and knowing the history of classical music, we know that classical music, we have Black people that contributed to classical music, and knowing what we know about jazz music, we have white people that contributed to the roots of that music as well. So I would say that we have all, going back to Gary's point, we have all contributed in some way to these musics collectively. And I guess the question is, how do we change or address the fact that in general, society doesn't, always see it that way, or, likes to create, the divisions and whatnot. That is a very interesting question. I think it starts with, just people having a certain amount of understanding and education, and really knowing, where the music came from and who contributed to it. I think they would certainly understand better that that it's not, you can't draw a line, and say that this music, like Black folks can't play classical music. I mean, that's nonsense. And the same is true to say that, people other than Black can't play jazz music. I just think that, it really starts with understanding and doing the research and just knowing where the music came from and who contributed to the music. And then once you know that, then you realize that, that there is no such thing as, appropriation in that way. But I understand why the question is necessary.
But that's because that, once again, it goes back to black and white.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't see, I would answer once again, Angela's would stop being white. Stop being white, then you don't have that problem. You play music. It doesn't matter, because a human being made that music, wrote that music.
And I remember talking to Billy Hart we both teach at New England Conservatory, and Billy Hart was talking about a student walking in and saying, "Well, I'm a classical percussionist." And he was like, "Well, what classical?
Right.
Senegalese classical music, Indian classical music, Japanese classical music?" Like the notion that all of a sudden one term gets shifted only to one small part of Europe is insane, right? So like even just stripping, before we even get to like really what the history part is, but like even stripping that dogma all the way down. And then also trying to make sure that people understand where innovation comes from. So what Leontine Price did once she stepped into these roles on the opera stage, I mean, these things are kind of like really, you want to propel excellence, and you want to propel ingenuity and inventiveness in your student. That's really, for me, where I need my students to thrive. I need them to have really clever and creative ideas of how to deal with their music and the world. And you will need examples from around the world, because this country is not necessarily the best example for a lot of things that we're trying to solve. So you're going to need to look around. I try to look around the world. Let me say that. I try to look around the world for examples of how I want to live my life, how I want to teach my kids and my students.
Fantastic. Pharez, you want to chime in there on anything?
Well, I mean, for me, it all comes down to self-respect and respect for others. A lot of the things we look at is about selfishness or greed or envy or just hate, and when those are a part of the way we live, we don't respect anything anybody else does. We all have our own individual thing, our own soul. Which direction we choose to go with that, those are the possibilities in life. And we would hope that everybody could come to respect the choices that someone makes. It has nothing to do with categories and labels and even your background. You can choose whatever direction you want to go. So when people start canceling out other things or saying this is better than that or this is better than that, or you have no right to do this or you have no right to do that, it gets crazy. And it's all about somebody else trying to put their judgments and decisions onto somebody else. When this music started, they didn't even call it. They didn't. Everybody knows they didn't call it jazz. It was just their music, and their music meant it was Monk's music, it was Bird's music, it was that person's music. That's what it was. It didn't have anything to do with, if it's a label and it falls under this category. It had nothing to do with that, and they respected that. They knew it. But when people wanted to sell it or promote it in some kind of crazy way, then they had to try to categorize it and throw it in a box. And life is not in a box, and this music is like life, so you cannot just bunch it up. And that goes for anybody's music, It goes for anybody's music. Beethoven, I'm sure he didn't think like, I'm in the group of all these other cats. He was just saying, hey, this is what I do. This is my thing. And that's a beautiful place to be. Do your thing and don't judge. Don't judge. There's a great book called Psycho-Cybernetics. It's kind of old, but it deals with self-image and visualization and all that kind of stuff. And it helps people to learn you got to be you and do the best you can be, and believe in you, and not get steered off the course.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I would like to address the first sentence of that question briefly. And the first sentence of the question says, we're all against racism or we wouldn't be here. I'm reminded of a moment that, whatever you want, I like to get my nails taken care of. So I go and get them done. Partially because I don't want them rubbing up against the valves. It's not a good feeling. But I'll tell you this, whenever I go get my nails done, I like to watch the people that are in the chairs, because a lot of those folks that are doing those nails are Asian people. And the way that they treat those people, a lot of times, they treat them like they're servants. A lot of the things that they say to those people, they treat them like they don't matter. Like, no, do my feet. No, I don't like that or that. And another side of it is, I've gone to restaurants that sell soul food. And I have heard people eating greens made by Black people, eating cuisine made by Black people that will call them niggas to their face. To their face, while they're eating the cuisine made by the people that are there. And I'm being direct because that's a direct sentence. Just because you're in something doesn't mean that you're of it. Just because you're in it doesn't mean that you're of it. It's very important to take a step back and not make the assumption that just because you like Black culture, that you like the people. You can't make that generalization. You understand what I'm saying? And you see it all the time in the music. I'll just be frank about it. There are people that literally have attempted to take Blackness out of the music and simply project one aspect of it. Most of the time, it's the theoretical aspect of it, how we view harmony. And it's most of the time through a European classical lens. That is the problem, because you can put it under the umbrella. Well, it's a big band, it's a chart, and it swings. So I clearly am not racist. That is not the case, okay? You have to not just take the pieces that you like and can, identify with. You got to take the whole thing. Just like when I pick up my classical stuff to play, Haydn and all of that, I deal with all of it, the entire scope of the culture that it came from, because I'm not from that. And so I have to do what? I have to humble myself. I have to say, I'm not from this. Let me open this door and say, okay, y'all, I don't know what's up here. Please show me. You have to have that kind of mindset there. But we'll move on unless somebody wants to add something to that. Yeah.
And I had the same problem, like so-called classical music. Every song sounded like the same song to me. And I mean, I don't care whether it was Beethoven, whether it was Bach, whoever it was. Oh, there's that song again. And so it wasn't until my daughter said, I had my radio station on, play. And actually, one of my favorite radio stations is the Frank Sinatra station. So I had my Frank Sinatra station on. And she gets in the car and she said, oh, there's that Christmas music. And so that's how she thinks about it. And when she would hear the Art Blakey, the Messengers and the Miles, she said, Dad, it all sounds like the same thing to me. They just play this, and then I hear the drums, and then they take solos, and so I began to understand it. But when I went to Juilliard, when I went there, they had no so-called jazz program. So it was a so-called classical, European classical. And we had to read biographies of the composers. I started reading these biographies. When I read Mussorgsky, who I loved his music. I started listening to his music because I loved his biography. This man had to be in the, he came from a military family. His grandfather, his great grandfather, his father, they were all in the military, lieutenants, colonels, so he had to do that, but he wanted to play music. I'm gonna make a long story short. He would disappear. He would go AWOL, go write music, and they would find him in doorways, drunk out of his mind, and they would bring him back. I said, that sounds like, and I'm not mentioning any names, but that sounded like some of my friends. They would find him in the doorway somewhere, passed out. And it began to humanize the music for me. And I saw that it had nothing to do with what the color coding, once again, it had to do with the music. And that's where we have to start, is it's music. It has nothing to do with a color or where it came from. Did you like the music? That's bottom line for me.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I'd like to address another question here. This is for Mr. Moran. The question is, I teach at a wealthy independent school. Although we have a high percentage of students of color, albeit very few whose roots go back to the American slave, the only students truly interested in jazz tend to be Asian or Asian American. I feel there is a dearth of students who are interested in this very important art form. So many students from all walks of life no longer really listen. In my day, I had to go well out of my way to obtain recordings, while now all music is accessible with the touch of a button. Any student I have, when asked to name one or two important pioneers of their instrument, cannot. With the paradox of accessibility and interest, what suggestions do you have to turn the tide?
Every student in the school should be required to play in the band. I don't know, if you have the money to buy instruments, then every student should be playing an instrument, period. That's how I grew up. I grew up in my school, everybody had to play a violin or a piano. That was it, elementary school. I believe in that. And I think as kids get older, somehow we think of music, which is the trick. They think of the arts as some extra thing that you can add on to your apple pie or whatever. And it's like, no, it's integral for you to understand that. So I would say the first step is to address the entire school and start to demand that everybody play music. Because once you have students who are interested in it, who you can't also say that only somebody's interested in it because they told you. I mean, I was a student also who did not share my passions with my teachers. I didn't do that. I didn't ask questions. I was not eager like that. I was eager to go home and practice. So rather than assume that there are people who are not interested in it, assume that they are, with the same amount of energy you would give the student who says they're interested in it. Because believe me, there's a whole bunch of folks who just want to get into music. And this form, for where popular music has become, where it's gotten to, it's like real genesis of it all. So, I turn right back around to the school board or the school president or the school principal and say, since you said you're wealthy, then just buy a bunch of instruments, get more music teachers, and put music up there as equal to math and science and English. That's my thought. So.
That is so important. That's something that I think about all the time. It's like, there are certain things that are required. At one point in time, home economics was actually required for most women in this country, which is interesting to say the least. Why can't we make music classes required? We do that on the elementary school level in a lot of public school systems, where they have to do, because it's going to take it's going to take schools, because we're watching what's happening with schools in the country. It's going to take individual schools, people who have the energy to log on to this and listen to this discussion, to go back to their communities with some fire
to save whatever values we think we are talking about in this call and whatever values you think is embedded in the music that's worth sharing with some students. It's going to take you to have some fire to go turn back around, not to the kids, to the people who are just deciding what the curriculum is and saying, this is what I want to demand for our students. Because I can't have them continue to just take more and more and more away from the arts in this country. It's not going to serve us well in 100 years if we just keep taking the arts away from kids. Look, and some kids are always going to find it. You know, I can always rely on that. But wouldn't it be amazing that not just every metropolis in the country, like a Chicago, New York, San Francisco, LA, Houston, Dallas, New Orleans, has a great art school? Shouldn't every rural city also have an arts high school, middle school, like a feeder that's really teaching people how to address the arts from wherever their location is, you know? So I have an energy towards that, because that's the thing we're gonna have to really fix, so that when students get to the college level, they actually have some way to think about their surrounding, the stories they need to tell about their people and where they come from, that considers the music that has now been our foundation for what we're talking about here.
Jason, that is so important. And I just want to just say one more thing to address what you're talking about here. A lot of people forget, in essence, the history of the public school system with Horace Mann, who pretty much created it, and why it was created. A lot of the reason that the public school system was created in the first place was literally just to have kids have somewhere to go so their parents can go work. A lot of people forget that. It was less about education and more about getting the workers to go out and work. So that being said, curriculum was never truly addressed. It was never really truly a point of, this is who we are in this society of America. This is what we want. This is American music. This is what we're doing. That was never of significance. Never truly. It was about keeping the kids in school from 9 to 5 so that these people can go out there and work to fill our pockets. Mr. Bartz, you're unmuted. Go ahead and chime in there.
No, I agree. I agree totally with you. You know, I mean, it just, it still just starts, you know, I always want to go to the root, you know. I mean, the root is, it has nothing to do with music, you know. So, I mean, we're trying to talk about the effects that music has on it, but the root of all of this, you know, I mean, music is music. Like I tell people, always ask me when they find out I'm a musician, you know, I'm traveling. Oh, what kind of, you know the first question they're gonna ask, what kind of music do you play? Okay, and I tell them all the time, there's only one kind of music. Okay, and they don't know what I'm talking about, you know. So I tell them the Duke Ellington, you know, Duke Ellington said, there's two kinds of music, good and bad. They kind of understand that, but then I say, well, okay, well, what do I look like? And they always come up with either jazz, you're either a jazz musician or a blues musician, you know. So I'm saying, what I'm trying to say is that music has been segregated, just like we have been. Because if you say there was a reggae band, you got a picture. If you say it was a country western band, you see the band. If you say it was jazz, if you say, no, I don't care what you say, if you say it was European classical, you see the musicians. It's as segregated as this country. So once again, it goes back to the root. I mean, that's where we got to deal with. That's where we got to start from. We have to start. And when you said that, that is so true. I forget about that. That's why kids, no wonder the educational system sucks. It was never meant to be an educational system. It was meant to be surrogate parents.
The daycare.
Daycare, yeah, that's what it was meant to be. So that's yeah.
Yeah, and we're seeing that now, you know,
Yeah.
with what's happening in the country. Kids got to go back to school. You know, I was on a Zoom meeting with my 10-year-old that's here, and I found it interesting that they're having a Zoom meeting about people meeting in person in a couple weeks. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you can't have a real meeting with people, how you mean to tell me that these kids are ready to go back and be in these classrooms for 6-7 hours a day? I don't know. It's just nonsensical to me. And then I started thinking about the research that I did on Horace Mann and what the point of it is. Really. It's all economics. Pharez, you were about to say something.
Yeah, there's so many beautiful points being made. I'm hoping that if we could take a little time to talk about what we maybe could envision in this whole thing, like the educational system, because I'm a firm believer in access, to giving these kids access, and you don't have to dictate to them what it is, or how, just access, and what Gary said about it all starts in the home, dead on, and it has to, and in some cases it's going to have to spill back into the home, through this child going back, working on whatever they received at school, and their parents kind of getting it by osmosis, because some of the parents today, they haven't been exposed to it a lot. Well, basically a lot of them. And so it works in reverse, but it still works, because as that child goes home and works on whatever it is they're working on, the parents kind of absorb that. And if they love that child, they sort of embrace what's going on with that, and that all helps. But we need that system that's going to start developing that again. We all know that they've taken a lot of the music out of the inner cities and deprived communities and things like that. I don't believe in vouchers. I don't believe in taking kids out of their neighborhood and taking them somewhere else to say, see, this is how they live and it's so much better, but you got to go back home. I would like to see this money that miraculously comes up from wherever, whenever it's needed, bam, here we got $3 trillion just pop up out of the blue. Not less than half or a third of that would take care of all the educational woes across the country. And I'm talking about making schools, quality schools, putting programs in schools where, like Jason said, music is part of the curriculum. What I mean by music, when I was growing up, was treated like phys ed. Everybody had to do it. I don't care what you did. When you went to school, you had to go to phys ed. And music is, to me, it's like that because it's a part of your being. It's not just you learning math or English, but it's a part of your health and welfare. I mean, you can get along without being a math whiz. You can get along without being a great brain in science. I mean, you got to know some things, but you got to be healthy. You got to be healthy. That's why you have to go to phys ed. You got to learn about taking care of yourself. Music was like that. It was a part of your mental, physical, spiritual, and all that well-being. And so everybody you didn't have to be the greatest basketball player. You just had to experience it. You had to be a part of it. You had to learn how it enhances your life. And everybody's not going to be, Charlie Parker or John Coltrane or Miles Davis. They're not going to be that. But their lives are so enriched by the exposure. I mean, I took music appreciation when I was in school, and that was classical music, would be classical music. And I didn't think about music categories when I was a kid. It was all just music. You listen to the pop, I'm not even calling them, the R&B stars on the radio. You listen to what they call classical music, what they call jazz. You listen to all of that. And it was just there, and everybody had their thing. And I didn't think of categories until I was saturated with people telling me this is what goes here and this is what goes there. I didn't think like that, and music was a whole lot more fun. There was no judgment, no labels, no all that. I think we can get that back. I do believe that, because education is the key. That's why I'm hoping maybe we can throw out some jewels on what can we do, like right now. What can we do, or what are some of the things? Because this is Gen, and we have the power. We have the power to expose folks. What do you guys? What's everybody?
Man, Pharez,
I'm not cutting into the flow of the
oh, this is
of the
great.
dynamic.
Mr. Whitted, you must be a psychic, because that was the next question I was going to ask, which is one of the things that I would like to know from everyone on the panel is if you had to pick one policy decision. I'm a big policy guy. The vast majority of the work that I do now in education is solely about policy. And I believe that if things are put in place and written down in curriculums, on the NAFME board, on the board of GEN, all these organizations that are sort of indirectly or directly policing what is being taught musically in schools, what do we need to change? What policies do we think should be put in place to address some of these issues? And I'd like to start with Ms. Davis, Lonnie Davis.
Oh, wow. If I can just, before I get into my answer there, I would just like to respond to the previous question really quickly. And that was around the person who asked about them, being in a very wealthy school with, a very limited demographic taking jazz. I would say that perhaps the rest of the kids should the teacher should instill a little bit more curiosity or spark some curiosity in their students. And I think there are different ways that we can do that as educators, but I think it's our jobs to make sure that students are curious and that we then have the solution for them, to share with them information and provide access, as what Pharez was sharing. And one thing that we did, we being my organization, because we have a very diverse group of students, some from very affluent families and some, who are on financial aid. We take them annually on an all expense paid trip to New Orleans. Me, being from New Orleans, I mean, we're in second line parades, like the real thing. We're at Congo Square. I mean, we're at, giving them access to situations that they certainly would not have otherwise had access to. And I think from those types of experiences, these are things we can't teach them in the class. They were certainly a lot more curious, when they came back from that trip. But before we went on the trip, we had them to do, a research paper, on the history and, the major players in the history of the music. And so they went into the program a lot more curious, and they came back, very, very enriched. And so that was just my point to that previous question. I think we have to find ways to make our students curious. And I think we'll find a lot more, students of, different cultures interested in playing this music, including our own, young Black students. To get to your question that you just asked me about the policy. I think, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we should start with, our administration. If we're looking at higher level jazz educational programs, I think we should have a certain amount of diversity, on our faculties, we should have policies around recruitment. I mean, I know that's hard to really, to really police or to manage, but I think that it's very important that we make sure that we are doing our best to diversify these programs, because there are too many programs to where there's one, student of color in the whole program, and they're isolated, and oftentimes these kids, they quit because they don't have the support that they need. And so if we can find ways to create policies around equity and diversity and, bringing in a more inclusive faculty and student body, then those students will feel that they have the support that they need to continue their studies and to ultimately, become professional musicians or professors themselves. So that's kind of what I have to say about that.
It's a great point. Actually, someone on social media made a comment about the fact that at Peabody, the vast majority of the jazz faculty is Black. And I said, well, you're isolating the jazz faculty. I said, you have to understand that the jazz faculty is part of a larger faculty. And if you look at the larger faculty, there's still inequity there, even though that the vast majority of the faculty members are in the jazz department are of color, which is interesting. So 100% with that. Thank you so much. Let's go to Mr. Whitted. Pharez, one policy that you would recommend at.
Well, I mean, first off, let's acknowledge that it's going to take some funding, and I always have to start with that. They need to put that money up put the money where their mouth is. Well, probably not, because they don't talk about it. We need to get the funding for programs that start from the ground up. I mean, start these kids early in programs that deal with singing and clapping hands and playing and playing percussion instruments. I'm talking about where it goes back to just the appreciation for the sound of music. Everything comes from that, just the ground up. I would love to see young kids, and this means programs that go back to grade school. You're not going to create a great horn player or a great musician is not going to come out of the blue. They don't just pop up in high school. Well, in some cases they do, but the starting programs with kids from elementary school on up, and it's not expensive, not nearly as expensive as things that they waste money on. I mean, the military budget is ridiculous, and just a teeny bit of that, once again, could take care of the whole problem. We have to start from the ground up, and simple programs. What was it? They used to have recorders in schools where the kids played the recorder, and everybody played one, and the choir, whatever that was, a music class, where everybody sang. No, kids don't sing today. They don't sing at all. And that's just how you get. That's just those are the seeds to wanting to get involved in music. You have to start somewhere. It wasn't just class, although that was the one that they had the competition for, but they would play all sorts of music for kids in class, because this is where they would have the opportunity to hear that. So programs that involve music listening, and you can talk about it. There's all sorts of ways to approach it. You just have to have creative thinking. Instructors or teachers or whoever just have to be creative and engaging. I'm talking about not just listen, learn. They have to be engaging. They gotta love it. Teachers that have to love it, and deal with it from a compassionate, just outgoing, selfless attitude. And that is how this music grows. That's what the music comes from. The blues is about sharing, and it's about relating. It's about empathy. The blues is about that, and that's what the music all of this comes from the same place. It's nothing different, you know. And if you start with these kids and get them on that track, the possibilities that come out of that, the ones that really want to search for that and go on and be a musician, they'll come out of that. And then the ones that just grow up to just dig it and appreciate all sorts of forms of music and life, they'll come out of that too. But start early.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Indeed. That's how I learned in the choir. Church, growing up in church, there were 3 people that couldn't sing in the church that I grew up in, and we thought something was wrong with them.
One more,
seriously.
I thought you was gonna say you were one of them.
I got older too.
One more thing I'd like to add is that schools have to be elevated to the level of respect as the churches are. Churches are like sacred ground. Nobody messes with churches. They don't go paint on the walls. They don't go, you know, busting out the windows. It's like sacred ground, rightly so.
Yeah, the idea that there are multiple schools, right? Yeah, that it's not just like in that building, or the church is also not just in the church. The church, you know, like is, and I would say also maybe the one policy I would like to see was a kind of a security for artists after they say they get out of college, right? I think the big problem, the reason nobody wants to try to do this is because they know that there's no security in it, right? You ain't got no health insurance, you ain't got no money, you ain't got no gigs, right? Like, you know, and you're trying to play music too. So it's look, believe me, that weeds out a lot of people who otherwise might actually contribute. Look, and we've also been to countries where the arts are supported, right? Where professionals who work all the time, professionals are supported. They're given stipends every year. They want to make a record, they apply to the government to give them $10,000 to make a record, and they get the grant, right? So I think, look, that doesn't solve everything, but I think there's a thing that happens that also weeds out people in communities who don't have that idea like, oh, I'm just going to go look for the art, you know? Well, you know, like we ain't got no lights in here right now. You know what I mean? What you talking about, the art, you know? Like there should be, what I would love to see for a country this vast is a kind of a security for artists, because we know that the arts actually leaves the record of what society actually is. And so whether, you know, we're going to do that regardless, but wouldn't it be great if there was something that set in place that said, okay, I'm designating myself as an artist in this country, that I would get support. And I wouldn't have to like go scramble and scrape the walls and knock on the doors, you know, and do all that for the love of my craft. But that there was a way that each state, each priest, I don't know, you know, like, I don't know, just some way to support the total kind of, the way we live is so like by a thread, you know, it's been by a thread for a very long time. And that's a lot of stress. So wouldn't it be great if we were able to ensure that someone at least had health insurance, artists had health insurance, and then artists got a stipend to make work about their communities, not just once, but like over and over. And then they showed other kids how to do that over and over. And so, you know, I would like to see a policy like that.
That's perfect. And, you know, that reminds me of a conversation that I had with a good friend of mine. His name is Frank Dell, and he was with the NDR Big Band several years ago. And we were talking about this, and he said, and I wanted to get offended. I wanted to, because I'm an American at the end of the day. And, you know, regardless of who you are, there's still a little bit of pride there. You know, when you go somewhere else, there's still a little twinge of it, a little. And so he was saying, he said, you know, what the problem with America and how you guys view art is, you view it as a novelty item to be sold. And whatever novelty item is hot, that's what you buy. We don't view it that way here. It's not novelty for us. It is a necessity. And I stepped back and I said, wow, he's exactly right. Like when you treat music like it's a now later or a Werther's original that can either be had or not had, and not realizing that sometimes that Werther's original is actually penicillin, like it's medicine. Until we look at it that way, then we won't be able to do those policy changes that you're talking about, Jason. Like we really need to approach that and get inside of, and we need more people like-minded of, all backgrounds. There is one race. I agree with that, Mr. Bartz. If we can all get into policy decision places, that would be great. Great. Congress. We can get local. Get on the student. Young students get on student council. Get on your city council. How many musicians do you know are actually on their city council?
Yeah.
Things like that. So, Mr. Bartz, I'd like to open that question up to you as well.
Well, what you're saying now is what that's would be my plan politically, because we have to start before they get to the school. I can remember Representative Conyers. There are politicians who love this music and who are trying to help this music, and these are the people we need to be affiliated with and work with. They could help us more. Same thing in the school. We need to be on the boards. We help make these decisions. We can't leave these decisions up to the people who have been making them, because they haven't been doing a great job, as we see. So we need to be on the boards. More of us need to be on the boards. The students need to be on the boards. Politically, we need to make it clear what we need. I like the idea that Lonnie said, that take the students on the field trips. If they look, when they go to a club, I've taken kids who would never heard this. They thought they hated this music. They went to the Blue Note and, man, changed their whole life. So the field trip, we take them to the zoos, we take them to the other places, take them to see musicians, great music. It doesn't have to be the Blue Note. It could be Lincoln Center, but, take them on these field trips. I think that's, that's what I would try to implement. Put the politics back into it.
Supplement that with bringing those musicians to the schools.
That's right. Bring them to the schools also. I forgot about that part. Yeah, same thing. And then they could get close up. They could talk to them. Really, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we are over time. I want to thank y'all so much for joining in here. I want to thank our next president, after y'all get tired of me, Lonnie Davis, who is our president-elect here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank board member Pharez Whitted for joining in the discussion this evening. And I want to extend a very special thanks to our very special artists that are here, the great Jason Moran and the great Gary Bartz. Thank y'all so much for your love. And thank you to everyone that has tuned in here. We will continue the discussion next month. Chime in. And thank you again. Please keep submitting these questions. And we are going to continue working with the Jazz Education Network to address these policies on a local, regional, and national, international level. And we look forward to continuing this discussion again. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
See you, brother.
Bye.
See everybody.
See you.